Good evening and welcome to Uncensored, a political panel where we get to the heart of the issues that impact you, and we do so unapologetically and honestly, with no interest in following the government narrative. In fact, we challenge the government narrative, which is what good journalists should do. I'm your host, Bruce McAllister, and let's meet our panelists as we have a lot to discuss this evening. We'll start with Danielle Smith, the president of the Alberta Enterprise Group, the former leader of the official opposition Wild Rose Party. Good evening, Danielle.
Hi, Bruce.
And hello to Rob Anderson, a practicing litigator, two-time Airdrie MLA, and also author of the Free Alberta Strategy. Good to have a lawyer nearby. Rob, how are you doing tonight?
Thanks, Bruce. Good to be with you.
Yeah, we've got so much to discuss, guys, nationally and provincially, and we're going to focus on Canada. But I think we'd be remiss if we didn't at least mention the fact that in Ukraine right now, there is an Emergency Measures Act, and a real reason for one with what's going on. Not sure you could say the same with the reason for the Emergency Measures Act in Canada. Danielle, what a difference a day or two makes. One day the Prime Minister speaks before a podium and says, hey, we need this act and we've got to have it for all these reasons. And then one morning he wakes up and says, we don't. What happened?
Well, I can't wait for the tell-all book about it, because he's looked foolish for the last couple of weeks as we've watched international press coverage just ripping into him for how he's handled the convoy in the first place and then how it managed to escalate. But I think that there was no hold bards in the Senate over the last couple of days as well. I don't know if any of these senators have seen quite so many views on their YouTube channels before. One of the ones I was looking at was 23,000 views on one of our Quebec senators, who said that this was absolutely ludicrous. And he harkens back to when we've invoked this in the past, the 1970s. Remember, with the FLQ crisis, we had a terrorist group that was blowing up mailboxes and kidnapping and murdering the members of parliament. And so when you look at by comparison, there was nothing even close that was happening this time around. In addition, we also saw that the border cleared in Alberta at Coutts without the benefit of the Emergencies Act. It got cleared on the Ambassador Bridge, same way with the provincial efforts. So I would say that those were a couple of factors, that there was an international embarrassment, real crisis that emerged that requires the global attention. The Senate was going to vote it down. Plus, I don't know if anyone's going to speak honestly about this, but the anecdotal stories I'm hearing about the number of people who are moving their accounts to credit unions from the banks, who are asking about how to move money offshore, who are buying gold. If you manufacture a run on the banks, that creates a massive amount of instability. And the longer that persisted, I think it would have been a real danger. So I think it was all those factors. Okay,
well, Rob, going second makes you have to repeat some of that, but I want to maybe phrase a second question to you in it. Jagmeet Singh had no hesitation whatsoever in supporting the need for the Emergency Measures Act. And then, of course, a couple of days later, I think he probably has some egg on his face when it's revoked. So to Danielle's point, would you agree with her assessment of the reasons why the Prime Minister revoked it? And what do you think of the NDP's performance in that vote?
Well, the NDP should be ashamed of themselves. This used to be the party of the working class, blue collar worker, and look at the absolute national embarrassment that Jagmeet Singh has been to that brand, and in selling them out essentially on this protest. But the real danger here is, Jagmeet Singh, for as ridiculous as his as some of his statements on this have been, he's never going to see the inside of the PMO. The Prime Minister, however, of course, is in the PMO, and he is a dangerous dude, as we said here last week or week before, and many times prior to that. This is a guy that has very tyrannical leadings, and people would always say, "Oh no, he doesn't. He can't be that bad. We can trust him," and so forth. But look at his record. He literally has been the number, exhibit A for, I would say, hate speech in this province or in this country. The way that he demonized these Canadians, called them Nazis, misogynists, racists, bigots, just disgusting, just absolute disgusting rhetoric by this Prime Minister. And what he did is he caused a crisis, certainly a political crisis for himself. And then he has the audacity to implement an act that has only been used in World War I, World War II, and the FLQ crisis. And even during those times, that's when it was under those War Measures Act times that some of the greatest injustices in Canadian history occurred, the internment of Japanese and Italian Canadians, Ukrainian Canadians in World War I. Some of these things that have occurred here in the past, but those were actually during real crises. This one, on the other hand, was nothing more than a tyrannical little man with, I would say, certainly dictatorial leadings, having people that were speaking out against him. He didn't like it. They were political opponents. And literally, there are today political opponents of our prime minister in jail because they are political opponents of the prime minister. It is a black eye on this country. He should step down. He is not fit for the office. And I sure hope that the Liberal caucus members will see that and get rid of him before he causes more damage to the country.
Well, that's exactly where I was going to go next, Danielle. Beginning with you, there are people in jail, good people in jail, family members wondering when they're going to see their loved ones again. I'm not sure what we'll save some of the legal analysis for Rob, but I'm not sure what the reasons are and how they're able to keep these people in jail. Any idea of when some of these protest leaders are going to get out, and how is this even possible in Canada?
It's so odd and it's so arbitrary. This is part of the problem when you allow for that kind of unilateral rule and arbitrary enforcement, is that one of the leaders, Tamara Lich, was in jail and not even able to get bail, for heaven's sakes. And then there's another who wasn't even arrested, BJ Dichter, and I'm not sure where he's gone to. Then another who went to jail, got arrested, and then was released, and another who's been fighting it out in court. You have to wonder, now that the Emergencies Act has been rescinded, how they're going to be able to continue to enforce that. The thing I think that the Convoy leaders need to be aware of is that they probably needed to have some kind of exit strategy, and that I think maybe was what caused the escalation. Is we saw that the border crossings could have been dealt with, obviously, without the need to implement these kinds of measures. I suspect Ottawa could have been cleared as well without implementing these kinds of measures. But I don't know that they gave any indication of what it was going to take to have them leave, other than a complete and full rescinding of all of the measures. Now, so if you judge it by that success, or that measure of success, where do we go from here? Because what I'm fearful of is now we've got a leader who doesn't like to be challenged, quite obviously, and he's not going to want to look like he's showing any sign of weakness. So does this mean that he doubles down and he continues with the path that he was on in mandating vaccines, not just for cross-border U.S. truckers, but across the country, and then all of the other workers and rail lines and ports? I mean, is he going to escalate the crisis that he created, or is he going to see that the writing is on the wall? That's what I'm really worried about with his instability, is that and his arrogance. I worry that he's taken the wrong message of this. The premiers, to their great credit, have gone in the opposite direction and are starting to rescind the measures. I think as of March 1st, Alberta is going to be completely restriction-free, but we still have this unanswered question at the federal level. And so, yeah, we saw this drama play out over the last month, but the reason it started is still not resolved. There is still a trucker mandate, and we still have people getting fired from their jobs for not getting vaccinated, and that's a problem.
All right, promise to come back to some of that. You raised a lot of good points there, Rob. But legally, there's some good people in prison here, seemingly with no justification. I mean, what can they do, and how do you see this legally?
Well, these are political prisoners. Like, let's not sugarcoat this. They're in jail because they opposed the mandates of Justin Trudeau. You're telling me that Tamara Lich is some sort of national security threat? What a load of absolute garbage. That is ridiculous, and everybody knows it. She wasn't guiding some army of organizers. I mean, this is of troops on the ground threatening the Capitol. She was part of a protest. She was making sure some of the protesters got fed. Like, this is a joke. She's a political prisoner. And what is also unbelievable about this is what's occurred within our justice system. The judge in the bail hearing for her was a former candidate for the Liberal Party of Canada. Like, think about that for a second. What kind of banana republic are we living in right now? So that judge decides that she's a national security. She denies bail. We give bail to rapists. Like, let's put this in perspective here. And we deny bail to this woman who had the audacity to try to organize a convoy to Ottawa, and maybe they didn't have a great exit strategy, but you know what? That doesn't matter. It's up to the people in charge there to do what they did down at Coots, to do what they did down at the Ambassador Bridge, to talk with the people there, to move them along. It took a few days, but they got it done without having to bring these draconian measures in. And in Ottawa's case, this tyrant of a prime minister has literally put Tamara and others in jail because he doesn't agree with them, and they are political prisoners. That's what we have here in Canada right now. So the next time I hear the prime minister talk about political prisoners in China, he can look in the mirror.
Well, we've got to keep talking about it then, Rob, and I'm glad we are tonight, so we can remind people what's going on. How do you think history views this protest? I mean, on one hand, it was a tremendous gathering, of course, of a lot of hard-working, working-class people. It was peaceful. They had a purpose. They made friends, and certainly were a likable group. On the other hand, well, they made a lot of enemies in Ottawa. They certainly weren't that popular with local residents, and like you said, Danielle, probably not an exit strategy other than end the mandates. What do you think at the end of the day this accomplishes? Is I mean, it's on the world stage, and I'm sure there's no regrets there, but how is it viewed, Danielle, do you think, historically?
Well, I think we need to see how it plays out over the next couple of months, because what I had hoped it would do is spark similar movements across the world, which it did. I mean, I don't know that Canada has ever been as inspirational as it has been over this last month. And it's remarkable to see all of the other convoys that have taken place, and people saying, gee, you really must have pushed Canadians to the limit if they're going to come out in the numbers that they did, because Canadians are law-abiding. And we do defer to peace, order, and good government. And so I think that there was a recognition that the politicians had simply pushed us too far. The fact remains, though, that some jurisdictions are not getting the message. I was just looking, somebody posted on one of my social media pages that France has just moved to the next step of turning off the vaccine passports of 4 million citizens who didn't have the third jab. And I think there is no doubt that that is the direction that this prime minister wants to go. He has signed terrible contracts with all these pharmaceutical companies because he was last to the table. He's lined up 9 jabs per person. You can't return them. You have to pay for them. You can't regift them. And so I think he would kind of want to follow the path that France is going down, where you turn on and off citizens' access to basic services in society based on their jab status. And I don't think jab number 3 is it. There'll be some new variant that comes up and some new reformulation of the jab. We've even heard from our premier here that he anticipates it'd be very much like a flu shot, where those who need it will get it on an annual basis. And that's quite different, though. If you need it and want it versus if you're forced to have it. If your access to society, your ability to go to restaurants, your ability to travel depends on your latest jab status. And so that's what we've got to watch. Is I think we still have these two forces playing out in the world. I think that the Prime Minister and Quebec are very heavily influenced by France. They're going in one direction. You look at the United Kingdom, Denmark, Norway, Sweden, and others, they're going in another direction. I think that's the way that English-speaking Canada wants to go. So I still think we have to watch and see whether or not we can declare victory on this. It's going to take a few more weeks or months before we can determine what history will say.
Good grief, Rob. Same question to you. Overall thoughts on the Freedom Convoy, the Freedom Protest?
I think it was a remarkable protest. I think it was very positive for the world and for liberty and freedom, and it made a lot of people feel that we're not alone in this world. That there are millions of people around the world that aren't happy with the curtailment of our freedoms during this time. There are going to be some brand issues with regards to Canada moving forward, particularly with regards to our financial institutions. Danielle was absolutely correct. One of the main reasons why there was the about face over 24 hours from passing the Emergencies Act into law, or invoking it, I guess you could say, and then abandoning it, was because there was a run on the banks. There were people, and I'm not going to lie, including myself, who were in the process of getting out of the big 5 banks in Canada, because there's just a trust factor. And if that's me in Canada, and if that's people in Canada trying to, if people in Canada have that concern, people internationally are going to go, why on earth would I put my money there? I mean, if that's the kind of banana republic that they're running, there's no confidence. So there's a real, I would say, a legacy of mistrust with our financial institutions that this prime minister has caused with his irrational decision making, and it's going to take a long time. And that is another reason. And I don't want to, be far from me to plug the Free Alberta strategy, but here I go again. This is why Alberta absolutely must establish an independent and expanded banking system for this province that is independent of the feds, that allows us to raise money here for our projects and our energy development here, and also is a place where we can, I would say, shelter Albertans who choose to invest in those banks from the dictates of frankly, an irrational and dangerous federal leader like we have in power right now.
All right, guys, we're about halfway through the time we've got. It just rolls when we get talking, and that was an important issue to cover, and I wanted to spend some time on it. But it's also budget day in Alberta, and to be completely forthcoming to you at home, we're in studio and have been for quite some time, so we haven't been able to go through the details of the budget. However, we know some things about it. For instance, Rob, maybe I'll start with you this time. We know that the province is awash in cash because of oil revenues. So obviously we expect to see that play out in the document.
Yeah, we've been really lucky. I remember we had these discussions when we were all in the legislature, when we were bugging then Minister Horner about
Deficit Doug.
Deficit Doug. Why he was a good guy, though. I like Doug.
Yeah, he was.
But the idea that we can only balance our books when we have oil at $100 a barrel, and there's a war in the Middle East or in Russia, causing oil spike prices, oil prices to spike. We shouldn't have to have $100 a barrel oil in order to not be floating in red ink. But we are lucky. A lot of these projects went to pay out. These big oil sands projects, they're past the payback for the capital side of things, their startup capital costs, and now it's a lot of money. This is the regime, you'll recall, that Ralph Klein, way back in the day, had the foresight to say, you know what, guys, let's give these guys a 1% royalty until they've paid back all of their capital costs, and then we will hike it from there, and Albertans will be rich. Well, Ralph, even though he's no longer with us, his legacy continues to be felt, because he's that policy has, from the other side, he's pulling our butts out of the fire here on budget running. So kudos to him for doing that.
Again, D, tough when we don't have all the details at this point, but I would assume you'd mention healthcare as one of the things that we expect to see an improvement in.
Well, let me go to the issue of revenues, and I'll look at the exact line item, but I think there was some projections that we'd be getting $18 billion in resource revenues this budget year. And I think the last high water mark was $12 billion, to give you some indication. But if we're still not running surpluses at this point, that means that we've got a structural shortfall because we are spending too darn much money. And what I'm worried about is that when I have heard the Premier speak, he's been talking about tax cuts. Well, I love tax cuts as much as the next person. But when Klein did tax cuts, he did it after we had already made significant progress on putting aside money to pay down the debt. We're what, $100 billion in debt? We can't continue doing this where we're coming up to an election. And so the progressive conservative strategy was always, well, let's give a little bit to conservatives so we can win their vote. And then let's have massive pay increases for the unions so that we can win the progressive vote. And then what happens is eventually the prices come down, and then you're left with an even bigger roller coaster problem and an even bigger deficit. So I'm hoping to see that there's some strategy to get off of this. I've proposed, I gave a submission to the Treasury Board. I propose that we need to start a structured savings plan. Just do it like the wealthy barber. Take 10% across the top, put it into a sovereign wealth fund, grow that sucker with investment income up to half a $1 trillion by the middle of the century. And then you're at a point where you can start eliminating your personal income tax or other types of taxes. But you've got to start somewhere. And this idea that we've had in the past that, oh my goodness, we can't possibly save any money because that will make us a target of Ottawa. We are a target of Ottawa already. So since we are a target of Ottawa, let's do something to protect ourselves. As for your question, though, on healthcare, The premier has been talking about changing healthcare ever since he got elected. He's been talking about these private surgical centers, contracting out. Saskatchewan has done it. No one pays out of pocket. It's money that goes directly to the facility, so you don't have to worry about that. The worry I have is, why hasn't he done it so far? There was such an opportunity during COVID when it was quite clear AHS could not manage to do two things at once. They shut down all of our surgeries. If I'd been there, I would have said, you know what? Sorry, AHS, we recognize you've got the pressure of COVID that you're dealing with. We will take all of the surgical services off your hand. We will contract out hernias over here. We will contract out knee and hips over there. We will contract out delivering babies over here, and so on and so forth. So I think he had an enormous opportunity to be able to do that. He didn't. And so the question I have is there the will there? I know it sounds like a good way of trying to win back some of that vote that he may have lost over the last few years, but I'll believe it when I see it.
Let's do something interesting here, guys. So you two certainly have been in the crosshairs of political scrutiny, and I guess we all have to that point. And we kind of know what's going on behind the scenes. So let's give people at home an idea right now. Jason Kenney is in the fight of his life to save his leadership, and he is out selling memberships. And obviously, the other side is selling memberships to try and defeat him at his leadership review coming up in April. Rob, let's give people a look at the other side. What's going on right now in his world, and how is this playing out, do you think? What are you hearing out there?
Well, I think you have to be human about this. This isn't easy for the premier. I mean, he's invested a lot of time. He's been a public servant for a long time, for decades. This is his career. This is the high point, and it hasn't gone as planned. And he's likely not going to survive April 9th. He could. There's still a chance, but I think it's highly unlikely at this point. So I think the premier needs to take that old walk in the snow and really do what many people have to do when they've maybe bit off more than they could chew, or things haven't gone the way that they had hoped, and do the right thing and step down. He has to know that he cannot win the next election. He has done way too much damage to himself, his brand, and to the brand overall. He's not a bad person, but he's made a lot of mistakes and on key critical issues. And you can sense the panic. I mean, I just saw, we were just talking off air about a story that just surfaced where he was asked, where he was expressing concern about all of these new angry Albertans that were buying UCP memberships and coming to the conference or the AGM, the special AGM, to vote probably against him to get him out and have a new leader selected. And he started, he's saying, these are angry people that just want to voice their displeasure with COVID policies, et cetera. It almost sounded like he was saying this is a small fringe minority with unacceptable views. And that's the thing, is that when you start attacking your own, because I guarantee the people coming to this special AGM are conservatives. These are conservative Albertans. They've probably been members of the party at some time in the past. And if they're not, it's because they're disgusted with the direction of the party was going, but they want to get back in and have a say. So he needs to take a look at this, and I would say do the right thing before April 9th and step down with honor. But if he continues forward, I don't think he's going to make it.
Okay, well, that's highly unlikely to happen. But take your point, Danielle. Do you want to pick up on that? What do you think's happening out there?
I have a regular listener, and she listened to me when I was on the radio, and she reads my weekly newsletter. So I use her as a bit of a gauge, because she's been back and forth and so angry at the direction that has been taken, so angry at being forced to be vaxxed or face losing her job. And she just sent me a note saying, "Oh, Jason Kenney, just heard him speak, and he's talking about liberty, and he's talking about the things that I care about again. Where's he been for the last couple of years? I could vote for this guy." And so that, I think, is the factor that's at play. And I'm greatly distressed that the premier didn't understand that taking the liberty position all the way through was a winning strategy. The fact that he's come to now realize that it's a winning strategy, great. But I think that there's a trust aspect. Is this going to stick when the next variant comes around? Is it going to stick if the prime minister minister says we're going to go to a mandatory third dose? Is it going to stick in the next respiratory virus season? There's going to always be that kind of concern. His best move, quite frankly, might be to say, look, I was here through the tough times. I made the tough decisions, and I'm going to leap to the federal level, and I'm going to run for the federal leadership of the Conservative Party of Canada, because it's now open. And if I'm looking this through and thinking of the type of leader he was and the type of minister he was back before he came to Alberta, we might actually have Prime Minister Jason Kenney now if he had stepped forward and run it at either of those other two times. Justin Trudeau has been beatable the last two elections, but nobody knew who the person was, and they flip-flopped a little bit, and they didn't know exactly what kind of leader they were going to be, and they weren't able to ultimately take it over to the finish line. Jason Kenney is one of the most formidable campaigners. He has spent a lot of time in Vancouver and Toronto in the large new Canadian and cultural communities, which is vitally important for the Conservative Party federally if they're going to be able to rally support. His positioning on COVID is actually perceived better outside of Alberta than in Alberta, because he's perceived to have delivered more freedom than some of the other premiers. So maybe it's not too crazy. Maybe there's always been this rumor that he wanted to use the premiership as a stepping stone to be prime minister. Well, maybe now's the perfect exit time. Maybe now's the time to throw in.
I do enjoy playing devil's advocate with the two of you, I must say. Those are both bold predictions and suggestions. Okay, so here is the fly in the ointment. We're a year and a half from an election. People have very, very short memories. We're about to have a budget that's well, again, we can't see it yet, so when this airs, you'll know, but I suspect it will be balanced, and if not close, and this could be the case going forward. Mandates will be gone, our freedoms will come back, and we'll have been the first province to take us there. I mean, don't you think there's a chance that the man is a master organizer? He has proven that. He put two parties together to create the UCP. Don't you think there's a chance he could pull this off in April?
Well, let me take that first. And I'll say that the problem, there's absolutely a chance that he could win the leadership review in April. When you think about the barriers that are put in the way, you have to pay $10 for a membership. You have to buy that membership 3 weeks in advance of the vote. So March 19th is the cutoff date. If you want the early bird fee, you have to pay $99. You've got to drive up to or down from, depending on where you're coming from, Red Deer, vote, turn around, come back. I mean, there's a lot of barriers in the way, and only very highly motivated people are going to do that. So there's a chance that he could get his people out more than those on the other side. As I understand it, I think there's something like 30 different constituencies that have opened up for nominations with the marching orders. Go out and win your nomination and get 100 members to come to the AGM to vote for me. And so you get 30 people, 100 people in each riding doing that. Yep. And now you've got 3,000 votes. And so you could definitely win. So I think there's a great possibility that he could win on April 9th. However, is there anything that will happen that will bring Brian Jean back into the fold? I don't think so. Or Drew Barnes back into the fold, or Todd Lowen, or Paul Hinman, and
or Danielle Smith.
Well, I've tried to be a uniter. I've tried to stay with UCP and say we should all sort of come on board and stay under one roof, because that's what I worry about. When you get the Conservative vote split 4 or 5 different ways, and you've got a unified Progressive Party, the numbers don't look good going into 2023. I can't see how he'd be able to pull that all together to beat Rachel Notley. She's going to sweep Edmonton. If you have enough of a vote split in Calgary, she'll sweep Calgary. Doesn't matter if she doesn't win rural, if she has both of those two regions. So I think we'd be looking at Rachel Notley for 2023 if he does win in April.
Challenge my challenge to you there, Rob.
I mean, I'm all about second chances, but
you don't see it, eh?
No, I just don't. I don't see it. I don't see him winning on April the 9th. I've never seen such a determined effort of people who are generally not interested in politics, or certainly in coming to a meeting in Red Deer of all places and paying $100 to be there. There are people organizing and there's going to be a huge vote there. I guarantee it. And there's just a point where, the problem right now is he's got a bunch of people that he thinks are supporting him that aren't going to support him in a private vote. And I don't see it happening. And I definitely don't see him winning or the UCP winning as with him at the head. The only way to stave off the vote splitting that Danielle is rightfully talking about there with the Wild Rose Independence Party is you need new leadership that can restore trust with obviously with a lot of Albertans who have lost trust in Jason Kenney's leadership and so forth. But importantly, you need someone that's going to cut that vote block off at the pass. These are the people that are very anti-mandate, very anti having their rights trampled on during the pandemic. People that believe in provincial sovereignty, that mostly want to stay within Canada, but are not going to tolerate the type of attacks from Ottawa that we've seen. And whoever the leader is going to absolutely have to appeal to that type of voter if they're going to have a chance to keep the UCP coalition united and win the next election. So that will be the reason he doesn't survive, and it'll also be the big question for the leadership vote that follows.
Just watching the time, guys. I want to finish where we started with this, okay? And Rob, we'll start with you. There are still mandates national in this country that we don't see any sign of being lifted. You can't fly. I saw a tweet the other day, whether it was true or not. What did Diefenbaker say? Trust but verify. 3 countries in the world that you can't leave: Cuba, North Korea, and Canada. If you're unvaxxed, you literally cannot leave the country. I mean, when does this madness end, and what can we do to put more pressure on the federal government?
Well, I mean, I think that the main pressure on this has to come from the provincial leaders. And I still, even though there's improvement in that area, I still think it's been very weak. Doug Ford's been a complete failure. You can go down the list. Scott Moe is Scott Moe. He's been quite strong on this, but especially lately. But that's Saskatchewan, which is an important province, but it's one province and it's one of the smaller ones. Premier Kenney has not been an effective advocate on this issue, obviously, because he's been flip-flopping all over the place. So until we have a group of, I would say, provincial leaders that are not asking but demanding that these restrictions be lifted, then I think it's going to be slow to happen. I do think it'll happen. I mean, it has to happen at some point. You can't just keep these things on indefinitely, I would think. But until there's strong leadership at the provincial level on this issue, I don't think you're going to see much change federally.
Danielle?
Well, and he's nailed it, because this is the fundamental problem for the premier, is that he's not been strong enough against Ottawa all the way through this. We had such a great plan in Alberta. We were going to roll out rapid testing at the Edmonton International Airport, and then they were going to start it in Calgary. So it would be very much like what happens in other jurisdictions. You arrive, you have your rapid test, you're negative, and you go on your merry way. And then you don't have to worry about who's vaccinated, who's not, and don't have to worry about having QR codes and who doesn't. And so that's the real problem, is that why didn't he press to say, hey, look, we have this pilot project, we're going to keep on doing it? Why hasn't it come back? We should be able to be in that position now. And to your point, I have a friend who tried to drive across the border thinking, you know what, if we just have our negative COVID test, maybe they'll let us across. It's a no-go. And they have made the airline ticket takers be the enforcers on the front line. I've flown out of the country twice now. And the second time coming back, they won't issue your boarding passes if you don't upload into the ArriveCan app all the documentation that you need. So it's kind of terrifying to think that if you aren't vaccinated, that you are trapped in your country. There isn't a way to leave across the border. You can't take a ferry anywhere. You can't fly in a plane. You can't drive across the border. It's bananas that we're still in this position when so many of the countries in the world are reducing their mandates. They never should have had an all or nothing. This is one of the things that Kenney did do well, is he always allowed for a rapid testing option. So even though it was darn inconvenient for those who did it, it still at least allowed for people to be a part of regular society and still participate. The my way or the highway approach that the federal government is taking, with no end in sight, and the fact that they still want to expand it, that's alarming. And if it is the case that we're in the company of Cuba and North Korea, shame on us. That's got to change.
Yep, 100%. And that's where we've got to leave it tonight, guys. We're fresh out of time. Thank you, as always, for your insight and analysis. Great to chat with you.
Thanks, guys.
Good to be with you. Thanks.
All right. Rob Anderson and Danielle Smith right here with Uncensored on the Western Standard. If you have any show ideas or topics that you'd like to see us cover, send us an email to the Western Standard. We'll do our best to get to them. And until next time, thanks for joining us. Good night.
Algodex is owned by Algonaut. This is great new technology just coming online now in the digital currency world. Algodex is a great way for you to use the digital currency Algorand in your day-to-day transactions. Can you imagine a world where we don't have to buy a cup of coffee using the federal dollar? And you don't even have to use the American federal dollar. You don't have to use the euro or the pound sterling. You can use real money, digital currencies that are not at the beck and call of governments and inflation. The Algodex is making digital currencies usable on a day-to-day basis.